All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming to the Basic Chant workshop. My name is Denise Nahigian. Some of you have seen me before. I've been a chanter here for several years. I've been a parishioner for 9 years. I also ring with the bell choir. I sing with Resurrection Choir. I sometimes make an appearance at the First Saturday Choir. So I'm in a lot of little fringe groups, but I'm definitely here, and I'm here most of the time. So I will be co-presenting this workshop with Maura Brown, who needs no introduction. And as Maura pointed out before the recording started, if you would like digital copies of the things that we handed out here, you scan this QR code, and it'll bring you to the Google Drive with everything. So let's start with pop quiz. Which ecumenical council said the following? The Church acknowledges Gregorian chant as specially suited to the Roman liturgy. Therefore, other things being equal, it should be given pride of place in liturgical services. Council of Trent, First Vatican Council, or Second Vatican Council, which ecumenical council felt that Gregorian chant should be given pride of place? Second Vatican Council, yes. So this is the most recent ecumenical council, 1965. It is still very much in force. So, given that, let's look at the agenda for today. We're going to start out. I will start out in the first section. What is Gregorian chant? Why are we doing this? How does it work? And then I'll hand it over to Maura, who will talk about Gregorian chant in modern notation, pronunciation of liturgical Latin, and then we'll practice with some actual chant. So yeah, it's a real workshop tonight, not just history. I do need you to bear with me because it's very necessary to get all this background in order to start. So, I have types of liturgical chant here as my very first topic. You might not be aware that there are many, many types of liturgical chant, not just Gregorian, and many of these types derive from the ancient Hebrew system called Hebrew cantillation. Hebrew cantillation, it dates back at least to David the psalmist, and it's still being used today in synagogues. If you go to a synagogue this weekend, you will hear Hebrew cantillation in the same ancient tradition. Now, obviously, it's not going to necessarily be the exact same thing, but it's the same idea, the same techniques through the ages. So, given that, I'm learning how to use this board. There we go. Let's kind of begin at the beginning here. The point of Hebrew cantillation is to communicate words through music, communicate the words of worship through music. Now, part of the reason for music is just that it's easier to communicate with a large audience when you don't have any kind of, say, AV system, right? In ancient times, we didn't have any sort of voice amplification. So if I chant, it's a lot easier to understand all the way at the back of the room. So that's part of it. There's a practical reason for chanting. But the other reason too is just by the sound of it, it kind of elevates the soul. It's lifting the voice to God. Now, chant it follows the words. The words are what count. It follows the cadence of natural speech. So with Hebrew cantillation, it follows spoken Hebrew. That's where the music comes from. So the natural rise and fall, when the voice goes up, when the voice comes down, the pacing of it, it's like speech. Which is why it's going to be difficult to get from Hebrew to some other language that might not work the exact same way. So, bear all this in mind. Jesus, as you know, was a Jew. His apostles were all Jews. They all sang Hebrew cantillation. So after Jesus' resurrection and the beginning of Christianity, Christian worship was an outgrowth of Jewish worship. But we have the problem of Hebrew. In the Christian tradition, not everybody was Jewish. The Christianity was open to the Gentiles, and the Gentiles did not speak Hebrew. So what had to happen from the very beginning was to modify this system of Hebrew cantillation into something very similar in the languages spoken by the Gentiles. And so we stopped calling it cantillation at some point. From now on, we're going to call it chant. And the chants developed around the spoken languages of the different Gentile groups. Let's see. Here we are in Jerusalem, where it all started. And so spreading out, the Christians in Egypt, their liturgical chant became what is now Coptic chant. There's Armenian chant, Byzantine chant. I have this map in your packet, and I also have an explanation right here at the top. So if you want to read a little bit more about the different types of liturgical chant. But the point here is that it's spread. Each different area had a different type of liturgical chant that all had the Hebrew cantillation as like an ancestor, but it had to work with the local languages. So as a result now, the Christian church has all these different versions of chant. Now, as Christianity grew, and it grew quickly, and it grew powerfully, by the year 540, Pope Gregory realized this is getting a little bit out of control. We have a different set of liturgy all over the world. So to partially consolidate what they were doing, he said, all right, the only permissible liturgical chants are the Old Roman, the Gallican, and the Mozarabic. These three traditions were codified into what we know as Gregorian chant. And this was back in the 500s. So it is an ancient form of worship, and it's based on an even more ancient form of worship. So these three chants are what became Gregorian chant. All these other ones that are in black are modern forms of chant that persist. Ambrosian chant existed, but there was so much respect for St. Ambrose that they just let it alone. Even though it was part of this territory, it should have been absorbed. But Ambrosian chant still survives in its ancient form, which is kind of cool. All right, let me see. I'm just making sure that I'm not leaving anything out here. Okay. So at this point now, yes.
So does the Russian, you said the synagogues are still going to have chant, we still have chant. Does the Russian Orthodox Church still do chant?
Yes, the Russian Orthodox chant, the Mameni chant. Oh, sorry. That started out, around the year 900. It's based on Byzantine chant, but yeah, it's definitely still happening. It's a different type. All right, what I wanted to point out here too is that from the end of the 500s now, we have this set of Gregorian chant from Pope Gregory the Great. It's not that he wrote it, he was just the one that said we need to organize. Even so, we have the written word, but we don't have written musical notation for a long time. It's going to be another 250 years after Pope Gregory before any form of written notation for music starts developing. And after that, it's going to take about 400 years before they perfect it. So we're talking about from the year 800 or so until 1200 that we are developing a system of written notation for these chants. In the meantime, everybody's just kind of doing what they heard done before in the past. So it's incredible that any of it was preserved intact at all. That was really the work of the Holy Spirit. So once the system was codified around 1200, that also set the stage for modern musical notation to develop. Here's another issue. Does anybody remember when the printing press was invented? Gutenberg printing press?
1500s.
1440. 1440. So prior to 1440, anything that was written down by hand by scribes, by monk scribes. So there weren't lots of copies of these. Monasteries had copies, convents maybe. It was mainly monasteries that had copies of these handwritten chants. So all of this started to change both with modern notation and also with the printing press. When modern notation started around the 1000s, music started to move in other directions, and it became easier to disseminate to people. People got very interested in other forms of music. They were able to duplicate it because there was a writing system and later a printing press. So other forms of music got really popular in a hurry. Then we got to the 1500s, which you might recognize as the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. One of the complaints of some of the Protestant reformers was the music of the Roman Church being modernized and no longer sacred. So it's interesting how things don't change much, through the millennium. That was one of the complaints, and this is where Anglican chant came in. Anglican chant started in the 1500s in the Anglican Church. It's still practiced in Episcopal churches, and it's a very traditional form of chant based on English. So even another form. So it's an outgrowth of Gregorian chant. In any case, all this turmoil is going on. By the late 1800s, chant was not really being used much for mass. It was still being practiced in monasteries. It still hadn't really been published or standardized. So at the end of the 1800s, we have a group of monks in the Benedictine Abbey of Saint-Pierre in Solesmes, France, right here. These monks decided that there was no way chant was going to survive modern times unless it was standardized in some way. So they took it upon themselves to reconstruct chant based on the medieval manuscripts and their own long tradition of chant. So what we have now, what we know as chant notation, traditional chant notation, it's really only from the end of the 1800s when these particular monks at this specific abbey, Solesmes, when these monks decided to standardize it so that it could then be shared with the world and put back into regular rotation. So again, it's a reconstruction, it's a faithful reconstruction, but there's no way we can know exactly what happened in various parts of the world for the last 2,000 years and beyond. There's no way. So the Solesmes monks' version of chant was accepted by Pope Pius X in 1904. And the collection is in what's called the Liber Usualis. So.
A big card!
So far, do you have questions? This is the most difficult part of the whole presentation, just getting all this back. It's not going to be as much as
What was it? Pope Pius
Pius X.
the 10th?
Mm-hmm.
A short quiz experience.